The noose tightened, the crowd roared. Then a woman no one expected stepped forward and stopped everything with 3 words. I'll buy him. In Iron Hollow, a town where power decides who lives and dies, Clara Vance just made the most dangerous gamble of her life, saving a man the whole territory wants dead. What happens next will burn this frontier to the ground. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The sun over Iron Hollow didn't forgive. It beat down like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dust into powder and the air into something you had to chew before you could breathe. By noon, the main street looked like a scar cut through the earth, buildings leaning, wood warped, everything bleached the color of old bones. Today, the whole town had gathered to watch a man die. Rowan Blackridge knelt in the center of the street, hands chained behind his back, head bowed but not broken. His hair hung long and wild, streaked with gray that hadn't been there a year ago. His face was all angles and weathered skin, the kind of face that had seen too much and remembered everything. Blood crusted at the corner of his mouth. His shirt was torn, filthy. But his eyes, those eyes still burned. Around him the crowd pressed close, men in wide-brimmed hats, women clutching shawls despite the heat, children perched on their father's shoulders to get a better view. Everyone wanted to see the mountain man hang. Savage! Murderer! String him up! The words came from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of judgment that didn't need proof, didn't want it. Rowan had lived too far from town, kept to himself too much, spoke too little. That was enough. When a rancher's son turned up dead 3 weeks ago, skull caved in, body left in the canyon, someone needed to pay. Rowan Blackridge, the man who lived like a ghost in the hills, was an easy answer. Sheriff Calhoun stood beside the gallows, one hand resting on the butt of his revolver, the other holding a crumpled piece of paper that might have been a warrant. Might have been nothing. In Iron Hollow, it didn't matter much. The law was whatever the loudest voice said it was, and today the loudest voices wanted blood. Any last words, Blackridge? Calhoun's voice carried over the noise, flat and bored, like he'd done this 100 times before. Rowan lifted his head, slowly. His gaze swept across the crowd, lingering on faces he recognized, faces that had once bought furs from him, traded whiskey, asked him to track lost cattle. Now they looked at him like he was already dead. He didn't speak. The silence stretched. Someone coughed. A baby cried. Then Calhoun nodded to the hangman, a squat man with arms like tree trunks and a face that showed nothing at all. The hangman stepped forward, rope in hand. That's when she moved. At first, no one noticed. The crowd was too focused on the gallows, too hungry for the drop. But then a shape pushed through the press of bodies. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. A woman in a faded gray dress that hung loose on her frame, her hair pulled back in a bun that had come half undone. She wasn't young, wasn't old, somewhere in between, the kind of age where people stopped looking. Clara Vance, the butcher's daughter, the woman who worked in the back of the general store counting inventory, scrubbing floors, avoiding eyes. She'd lived her whole life on the edges of Iron Hollow, too big for the dresses in the catalog, too quiet for the church socials, too plain to be noticed, and too tired to care. She stepped into the clearing around Rowan, and the crowd went quiet. Not because they respected her, because they were confused. What's she doing? Is she lost? Someone laughed. It was a mean sound, the kind of laughter that had followed Clara since she was a girl. She'd learned to ignore it, mostly. Sheriff Calhoun frowned. Miss Vance, this ain't a place for I'll buy 'em. Her voice came out thin, shaking, but it carried. 3 words, simple, impossible. The crowd erupted. What'd she say? Buy him? You can't buy a man. She's gone mad. Calhoun held up a hand and the noise died down to a murmur. He looked at Clara like she'd just sprouted wings. Miss Vance, I don't think you understand what's happening here. This man is a murderer. He's getting what he deserves. You don't have proof. Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. No trial, no witness, just people saying things. People saw him near the canyon. People see a lot of things that aren't true. Calhoun's jaw tightened. This isn't a debate. Step back before you embarrass yourself. But Clara didn't move. She turned slowly and looked at the crowd. At the faces she'd known her whole life. Mrs. Pemberton, who used to pinch her arm in Sunday school and whisper that gluttony was a sin. Mr. Dawson, who never met her eyes when she sold him flour. The Harlow brothers, who'd once thrown rocks at her and called her the cow. They were all here, watching, waiting for her to fail. "I have money," Clara said. Her voice was stronger now, though her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack a rib. $200, saved from working at the store. It's yours, all of it, if you let him live. The crowd went silent again. $200 was more than most people in Iron Hollow saw in a year. It was a fortune, a future. Sheriff Calhoun stared at her. Then he laughed. Not cruel, just baffled. "You want to pay $200 for a man you don't even know? I know he hasn't had a fair chance. He's a killer. You don't know that. Everyone knows that." Clara's throat burned. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But something in her, something stubborn and half-broken and fed up with being invisible, kept her feet planted. "Then let me take responsibility," she said. "If he's guilty, I'll pay the price. But if he's not, then you just murdered an innocent man." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rowan, still kneeling in the dirt, finally looked at her. Really looked. His eyes were gray, sharp, like flint. He didn't say anything, but she saw the question in his face. Why? She didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. Calhoun rubbed his jaw. The crowd was muttering now, shifting, uncertain. This wasn't how hangings were supposed to go. There were rules. Unspoken, maybe, but rules all the same. You didn't interrupt. You didn't make offers. You didn't... $200, a voice called from the back. Smooth, calm. A voice that didn't belong to the shouting mob. The crowd parted and a man stepped through. Tall, lean, dressed in a tailored coat despite the heat. His hair was slicked back, his boots polished. He looked like he'd stepped out of a painting, too clean, too composed for a place like Iron Hollow. Edwin Halbrook, the new judge. He'd arrived 2 months ago, sent by the territorial governor to bring order to the frontier. So far, he'd brought paperwork and fines and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Miss Vance?" Halbrook said, tipping his hat. "That's quite an offer." Clara's stomach twisted. She didn't trust him. No one in town did, but no one dared say it out loud. "It's a legal offer," Halbrook continued, stepping closer. "Though unusual. The territory does allow for alternative sentencing, a bond, if you will. If Miss Vance is willing to take full responsibility for Mr. Blackridge's actions, the law permits it." Calhoun's frown deepened. "You're saying we let him go?" "I'm saying we accept her offer. $200 is substantial, and if Mr. Blackridge steps out of line even once, Miss Vance forfeits everything. Her money, her property, perhaps more." Halbrook's smile widened. "It's a fair arrangement. Wouldn't you agree, Miss Vance?" Clara's mouth went dry. She hadn't thought this through, hadn't thought past the moment, past the need to do something instead of standing silent while a man died. She swallowed. "Yes, I agree." Then it settled. Halbrook turned to the crowd. "Miss Vance has purchased Mr. Blackridge's freedom. For 1 year he will remain under her supervision. Should he commit any crime, any at all, she will bear the consequences. Justice delayed, but not denied." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They just stared, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Calhoun looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but he nodded. "Cut him loose." The hangman moved forward, keys jangling. He unlocked the chains and Rowan's hands came free. He didn't stand right away. Just knelt there, rubbing his wrists, breathing hard. Clara waited, heart pounding, wondering if she'd just saved a man or signed her own death warrant. Finally, Rowan stood, slowly. He was taller than she'd expected, broader. He looked at her again, and this time she saw something else in his eyes. Not gratitude, suspicion. "Why?" he asked. His voice was rough, like gravel scraped across stone. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. She didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound stupid. "Because it was wrong," she said finally. Rowan stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away, pushing through the crowd without looking back. Clara stood alone in the center of the street, $200 poor, her life suddenly tangled with a man everyone believed was a killer. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring, casting glances over their shoulders. Some looked at her with pity, others with contempt. A few with something darker. Sheriff Calhoun stepped close, voice low. "You just made a mistake, Miss Vance, a big one." She didn't answer, couldn't. Judge Halbrook tipped his hat again, that smooth smile still in place. "Pleasure doing business with you, Miss Vance. Do let me know if you need assistance." Then he was gone too, swallowed by the crowd. Clara stood there until the street was empty, until the sun dipped lower and the shadows grew long, until her legs stopped shaking enough to carry her home. She'd done it. She'd stopped the hanging. Now she had to figure out what came next. Rowan didn't go far, just to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland and the hills rose in the distance. He sat on a flat rock, head in his hands, breathing like he'd run a mile. He'd been ready to die, had made peace with it, or as close as a man could get. The noose had felt almost like a relief, an end to the running, the suspicion, the weight of living alone in a world that didn't want him. Then she'd stepped forward. He didn't know her, didn't owe her, didn't understand her. And that made her dangerous. Rowan had learned, the hard way, that people didn't do things for free. Everyone wanted something, payment, power, a favor they'd call in later. He'd spent years in the mountains avoiding exactly that. The tangled obligations of civilization, the invisible chains people wrapped around each other. Now he was chained again. Not to iron, but to her. He spat into the dirt and stood. His ribs ached where they'd kicked him. His head throbbed. But he was alive. For now. He looked back toward town, toward the general store where Clara Vance worked. He could leave. Head into the hills, disappear, never look back. She couldn't stop him. No one could. But if he ran, she'd pay the price. That judge had made it clear. Rowan cursed under his breath. He'd survived a lot of things. Winters that froze men solid. Grizzlies, hunger, loneliness that gnawed worse than any animal. But this was new. Clara made it home just as the sun touched the horizon. Her house was small, a single room attached to the back of her father's old butcher shop. He'd died 3 years ago, left her the shop and a pile of debts. She'd sold the tools, kept the building, lived quiet. Until today. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, eyes shut, heart still racing. What had she done? $200. Gone. A year of her life tied to a stranger. And for what? A man who looked at her like she was a puzzle he didn't care to solve. She crossed to the table and sat, staring at the empty space where her savings used to sit in a small wooden box. She'd counted those bills every week, imagined what they could become. Maybe a new dress. Maybe a trip somewhere far from Iron Hollow. Maybe just the quiet comfort of knowing she wasn't one disaster away from losing everything. Now they were gone. A knock at the door made her jump. She froze. It was late. No one came by this late. Another knock, harder. Clara stood, wiping her palms on her dress, and opened the door a crack. Rowan Blackridge stood on her doorstep. She'd expected anger, maybe threats. Instead, he just looked tired. "I need a place to sleep," he said. Clara blinked. "What?" "Contract says I'm your responsibility. That means you're mine, too." He glanced past her into the small room. "You got space?" No. Yes, but..." Then it settled. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, glanced around, and dropped his pack in the corner. "I'll take the floor." Clara stood in the doorway, mouth open, brain scrambling to catch up. Rowan pulled a blanket from his pack, spread it on the floor near the cold stove, and sat down. He looked up at her, expression flat. "You saved my life. That makes us even, far as I'm concerned. But if we're stuck together for a year, we do this smart. You don't trust me. I don't trust you. We keep it simple. I work. You keep the town off my back. We survive. Deal?" Clara's hands trembled. She wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him to leave, to take his cold eyes and his rough voice and his whole dangerous presence somewhere else. But she'd made a choice, and choices had consequences. "Deal," she whispered. Rowan nodded once, lay down, and closed his eyes. Clara shut the door, locked it, and stood there in the dim light of a single candle, wondering if she'd just saved a man's life or invited a wolf into her home. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and the distant howl of something wild. Iron Hollow settled into uneasy sleep. But the storm was just beginning. Morning came too early. Clara woke to the smell of coffee, which made no sense because she hadn't made any. She sat up, blanket twisted around her legs, and saw Rowan crouched by the stove, coaxing a fire to life with practiced efficiency. He didn't look at her, just poured 2 tin cups and set one on the table. "Figured you'd need it," he said. Clara stared at the cup like it might bite her. She wasn't used to this. Someone in her space, moving through her morning, existing where she'd always been alone. It felt wrong, intrusive. But the coffee smelled good. She took the cup, sipped, and nearly choked. It was strong enough to strip paint. Rowan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Too much?" "It's fine," Clara lied, eyes watering. He stood, rolling his shoulders. Even in the small room, he moved like he needed more space, like walls were suggestions he hadn't agreed to. "I'll need work, something that keeps me visible. Town's gonna be watching." Clara set the cup down. "Mr. Hendricks needs help at the livery. He's been asking for weeks." "Hendricks hates me." "Hendricks hates everyone. But he pays." Rowan considered this, then nodded. "I'll talk to him. And I'll—" Clara trailed off. What would she do? Go back to the store like nothing had changed? Pretend she hadn't just upended her entire life? "You'll keep your head down," Rowan said, reading her face. "Don't explain. Don't apologize. You made a choice. Own it." Easy for him to say. He'd spent years not caring what people thought. Clara had spent her whole life drowning in it. But she nodded anyway. Rowan grabbed his pack and headed for the door. He paused, hand on the frame. "That judge, Halbrook. You trust him?" "No." "Good. Don't start." Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. Clara sat alone with her terrible coffee and the sinking feeling that she'd just stepped off a cliff with no idea where the ground was. The store opened at 8. Clara arrived at 7:45, keys shaking in her hand. The building was old, sagging in places, but it had been her father's and now it was hers. She sold dry goods, flour, salt, occasionally fresh meat when the hunters brought something in. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell hit her. Wood, dust, the faint tang of preserved meat. Comforting, safe. Then she saw the word painted across the back wall. Traitor. The letters were crude, dripping, done in something dark. Tar, maybe, or blood. Clara's stomach turned. She stood frozen, staring, until her brain caught up and her legs remembered how to move. She crossed to the wall, touched the paint. Still tacky, fresh. Someone had been here, last night, while she slept. The bell above the door chimed, and Clara spun, heart hammering. Mrs. Pemberton stood in the doorway, basket on her arm, lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at Clara, then at the wall, then back at Clara. "Well," she said, "I suppose you've made your bed." Clara's throat tightened. "Mrs. Pemberton, Don't." The older woman's voice was cold, clipped. "I've known you since you were a child, Clara. I watched your father build this place, and now you've thrown it all away for a murderer. He's not. Everyone knows what he is, and now everyone knows what you are too." Mrs. Pemberton turned and walked out, the bell chiming again, mocking. Clara stood there, alone, staring at the word on her wall. The next customer didn't come until noon. Old Mr. Farley, who bought tobacco and never talked much. He glanced at the wall, grunted, paid, and left. No one else came. By closing time, Clara had sold exactly 3 items. Normally, she'd move 20, 30. The store was the only place in Iron Hollow to buy certain things. People needed her, but apparently they needed their pride more. She locked up as the sun dipped low, exhaustion pulling at her like weights. She hadn't eaten, hadn't cleaned the wall, just stood behind the counter waiting for customers who never arrived. Rowan was sitting on her steps when she got home. His knuckles were scraped, his shirt dirtier than before. He looked up as she approached. "Hendricks hired me," he said. "Pays half what he'd pay anyone else, but it's something." Clara nodded, too tired to speak. Rowan studied her. "Bad day?" She almost laughed. "Someone painted traitor on my wall." His jaw tightened. You clean it off? Not yet. He stood. Show me. They walked back to the store in silence. Rowan inspected the word, running his fingers over the letters like he could read something in them. Then he turned to her. You got lye soap? In the back. Get it? And a brush. They worked together, scrubbing the wall until Clara's arms burned and the word faded to a ghost. It didn't disappear completely, tar was stubborn, but it was better. Livable. Rowan tossed the brush into a bucket. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I know. You sure you can handle it? Clara looked at him, this man she'd saved, this stranger who'd somehow become her responsibility. I don't know, but I'm not backing down. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or just surprise. Then we do it together, he said. 3 days passed. The store stayed empty. Clara's savings dwindled. She sold a bag of flour to a passing traveler, some salt to a family heading west, but the locals stayed away. Not all of them. Some still came, quiet and quick, like they were committing a crime. But most avoided her like she carried plague. Rowan worked at the livery, shoeing horses, mucking stalls, doing the jobs no one else wanted. Hendricks paid him in coins that barely added up to $1 a day, but Rowan didn't complain. Just came home each night, hands blistered, and helped Clara with whatever needed doing. It was strange having him there. He didn't talk much, didn't ask questions, just existed in her space like a piece of furniture she hadn't picked but couldn't return. Sometimes she'd catch him staring out the window, jaw tight, eyes distant. She wondered what he was thinking, if he regretted staying, if he hated her for dragging him into this. She never asked. On the 4th day, Sheriff Calhoun came by. Clara was restocking shelves when the door opened and he walked in, hat in hand, expression unreadable. He looked around, taking in the empty store, the faded stain on the wall, the way Clara's shoulders hunched like she was bracing for a blow. Miss Vance. Sheriff. He shifted his weight. Just wanted to check in, see how things are going. Fine, Clara lied. Calhoun's eyes flicked to the wall. Heard you had some trouble. Nothing I can't handle. He nodded slowly. Look, I'll be straight with you. People are angry. They wanted justice, and you took it away. Now they're looking for someone to blame. Let them blame me. It's not just blame, Miss Vance. It's pressure. Economic pressure, social pressure. The kind that breaks people. He met her eyes. I've seen it before. Good folks pushed to the edge because they stood where they shouldn't have. Clara's hands clenched. Are you warning me or threatening me? Warning. I don't like what's happening any more than you do. But I can't stop it, not without proof, and not when half the town wants your store shut down. On what grounds? Calhoun hesitated. There's talk about your contract with Blackridge. Some folks think it's improper. A woman living with a man, unmarried, it raises questions. Heat flooded Clara's face. He sleeps on the floor. We barely speak. There's nothing improper about it. I know, you know. But them? He gestured vaguely toward the window. They don't care about truth. They care about appearances, and right now the appearance is bad. Clara's chest tightened. She'd known this would be hard, but she hadn't expected the town to twist something innocent into something ugly. What do you want me to do? She asked quietly. I don't know, but be careful. Judge Halbrook's been asking questions about your finances, your property. He's building something, and I don't think it's in your favor. Clara's blood went cold. What kind of something? I don't know yet, but watch your back. Calhoun put his hat on, tipped it. And keep Blackridge on a short leash. One mistake, and they'll bury you both. He left. Clara stood there, surrounded by half-empty shelves and the suffocating weight of inevitability. That night, she told Rowan what Calhoun had said. They sat across from each other at the small table, the space between them filled with things neither knew how to say. Rowan's face was stone. Halbrook's making a move. Why? What does he gain? Control. Your store sits on land near the river. Good land. Valuable. If he can force you out, he can take it. Clara's stomach dropped. But the contract? The contract ties me to you, which means if I fail, you lose everything. House, store, all of it. Rowan leaned back, jaw tight. He's not trying to punish us. He's trying to own us. Then we don't fail. It's not that simple. Why not? Rowan looked at her, something dark and broken in his eyes. Because I've already failed people before, and it never ends well. Clara wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to dig into the pain she saw etched into every line of his face. But she didn't, because some wounds didn't need poking. Then this time will be different, she said instead. Rowan didn't answer, just stared at his hands, scarred and rough, like they held secrets he'd never share. The first act of sabotage came a week later. Clara arrived at the store to find the lock broken, the door hanging open. Inside, shelves had been overturned, flour spilled across the floor, jars of preserves smashed against the walls. The destruction was methodical, designed to ruin without stealing. Rowan was at the livery. Clara stood alone in the wreckage, breathing hard, fists clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. She wanted to scream, wanted to cry, wanted to find whoever did this and make them pay. Instead, she grabbed a broom and started cleaning. By the time Rowan arrived, she'd swept most of the flour into a pile and righted the shelves. He took one look at the mess and his face went cold. Who? I don't know. Calhoun know? I haven't told him. Rowan's hands flexed. You should. And say what? Someone broke in and made a mess? He'll write it down and do nothing. Clara's voice cracked. No one's going to help us, Rowan. We're alone in this. He didn't argue, just picked up a broken jar and started helping her clean. They worked in silence, side by side, until the store looked almost normal again. But the damage was done. Not just to the building, but to Clara's resolve. She'd thought she could handle this, thought she was strong enough. Now she wasn't sure. That night, someone threw a rock through her window. It landed on the floor near where Rowan slept, glass scattering everywhere. He was on his feet in seconds, eyes sharp, body coiled. Stay here, he said. Rowan, but he was already out the door, moving fast and silent. Clara stood in the broken glass, heart pounding, waiting. He came back 10 minutes later, breathing hard, fists clenched. Gone, he said. Whoever it was ran fast. Clara looked at the rock on her floor. There was a note tied to it with string. She picked it up, hands shaking, and unfolded the paper. 3 words, leave or burn. She read it twice, then handed it to Rowan. He crumpled it in his fist. They're trying to scare you, he said. It's working. Rowan looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something soften in his face. Not pity, something closer to understanding. You want to quit? He asked quietly. Clara's throat burned. Part of her did. Part of her wanted to walk away, leave Iron Hollow, start over somewhere no one knew her name. It would be easier, safer. But another part of her, the part that had spent her whole life being invisible, being dismissed, being told she didn't matter, refused. No, she said. I want to fight. Rowan nodded once. Then we fight. The next morning, they boarded up the window and reinforced the locks. Rowan bought nails and wood from Hendricks using his meager wages, and together they turned Clara's small house into something closer to a fortress. It wasn't much, but it was something. The town watched. Clara could feel their eyes every time she walked to the store, every time she bought supplies, every time she existed. Some looked at her with contempt, others with curiosity, a few with something that might have been respect. But no one helped. 2 weeks after the vandalism, a man came to the store. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Clara recognized him. Thomas Greer, one of the biggest ranchers in the territory. He owned land stretching from the canyon to the ridge, ran cattle by the thousands, and had enough money to buy Iron Hollow twice over. He walked in like he owned the place, hat tipped back, boots clicking on the wooden floor. Miss Vance, he said, voice smooth as oil. Mr. Greer. Clara's hands tightened on the counter. He looked around, taking in the near-empty shelves, the boarded window, the faded stain on the wall. Heard you've had some trouble. Nothing I can't handle, I'm sure. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I also heard you're struggling. Customers not coming in like they used to. Clara said nothing. Greer leaned against the counter, casual. I'm a businessman, Miss Vance. I see opportunities where others see problems, and I see an opportunity here. I'm not selling. I haven't made an offer yet. Don't bother. His smile faded. You're in over your head. That contract you signed, it's a noose around your neck. One wrong move from Black Ridge and you lose everything. House, store, maybe more. He straightened. I'm offering you a way out. Sell me the land. I'll pay fair price. You can leave Iron Hollow. Start fresh somewhere else. No shame in it. Clara met his eyes. There's plenty of shame in running. Greer's jaw tightened. You think you're being brave, but bravery without sense is just stupidity. Blackridge is dangerous. Everyone knows it. And when he snaps, and he will, you'll be the one who pays. Then I'll pay. Greer stared at her for a long moment. Then he tipped his hat, smile gone. Your choice, Miss Vance, but don't say I didn't warn you. He left. Clara stood there, shaking, wondering if she'd just made the smartest decision of her life or the dumbest. That night, she told Rowan about Greer's visit. They sat by the stove, the fire crackling, shadows dancing on the walls. Rowan's face was dark. He's working with Halbrook. You think? I know. Greer's been buying up land for years, squeezing out small owners, taking what he wants. Your store sits right where he needs to expand his operation. He makes you an offer. You refuse. Then things get worse until you've got no choice. Claire's chest tightened. So what do? We don't give them a reason. I stay clean, you stay strong, and we wait. Wait for what? For them to make a mistake. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think they could outsmart men like Greer and Halbrook, but she'd lived in Iron Hollow long enough to know how power worked. It didn't make mistakes. It just crushed everything in its path. Still, she nodded, because what else could she do? The days blurred together. Work, silence, tension. Rowan kept his head down at the livery, doing his job, avoiding trouble. Clara kept the store open, even when no one came, even when her supplies dwindled and her savings ran dry. They didn't talk much, but they existed together, two people tied by a contract neither fully understood, fighting a battle neither knew how to win. And then, on a cold morning 3 weeks after Greer's visit, Clara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, heart racing. Rowan was already at the door, staring out into the pre-dawn darkness. What is it? Clara asked. He didn't answer, just pointed. Clara crossed to the window and looked out. Her store was burning. Flames licked up the sides, bright and hungry, devouring wood and hope with equal appetite. Smoke billowed into the sky, black and thick, blotting out the stars. Clara ran. She didn't think, didn't plan, just ran toward the fire like she could stop it with her bare hands. Rowan grabbed her arm, yanked her back. It's too late, he said. No! Clara, it's gone. She fought him, tears streaming, lungs burning. But he was right. The store was already collapsing, beams cracking, roof caving in. Everything her father had built, everything she'd tried to save. Gone. The town gathered, same as they had for Rowan's hanging. Watching, whispering. No one moved to help, no one fetched water. They just stood there, faces lit by the fire, eyes empty. Sheriff Calhoun arrived, looked at the blaze, and shook his head. Nothing we can do now. Clara turned on him, voice raw. Someone did this. Someone burned my store. Can you prove it? Can you? Calhoun's face was hard. Without proof, I can't do anything. Judge Halbrook appeared beside him, smooth and calm as ever. A terrible tragedy, Miss Vance, but perhaps a blessing in disguise. You're free now. Free to sell the land, move on, rebuild elsewhere. Clara stared at him, rage and helplessness warring in her chest. You did this. Halbrook's smile didn't waver. Careful, Miss Vance. Accusations without evidence can be dangerous. Rowan stepped forward, and the crowd shifted, uneasy. His eyes were locked on Halbrook, cold and deadly. Say the word, Rowan said quietly, speaking only to Clara. And I'll end this. Right here. For a moment, Clara wanted to unleash him, let him do what he did best, consequences be damned. But she saw the trap, saw Halbrook's smile widen just a fraction, saw the way Calhoun's hand drifted toward his gun. They wanted Rowan to snap, wanted an excuse. No, Clara said. Her voice shook, but it was firm. Not like this. Rowan's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. Halbrook tipped his hat. Wise decision. The fire burned until dawn. By the time the sun rose, there was nothing left but ash and charred beams. Clara stood in the ruins, staring at what used to be her future. Rowan stood beside her, silent. "What now?" Clara whispered. Rowan looked at her, something hard and determined settling into his features. "Now we stop playing by their rules." Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat at the table, staring at the soot under her fingernails, the smell of smoke still thick in her hair. Everything she'd owned was ash. The store, the inventory, the future she'd scraped together coin by coin. Rowan sat across from her, silent. He'd been watching her for hours, waiting for her to break. She could feel it, his anticipation, like he expected her to crumble, to finally admit this was too much. But she didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat there, hollow and numb until the sun came up. "We need proof," she said finally. Her voice was flat, scraped raw. Rowan leaned forward. "Proof of what?" "That they burned it. That Halbrook and Greer are working together. That this whole thing was designed to force me out." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Without proof, we're just two people yelling at shadows. Proof won't matter if they own the sheriff. Then we find someone who'll listen. Like who?" Clara didn't have an answer. In a town like Iron Hollow, power was concentrated in the hands of three men: Sheriff Calhoun, Judge Halbrook, and Thomas Greer. Everyone else either worked for them or stayed quiet to survive. But there had to be someone who'd seen something, someone willing to talk. Rowan stood, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "Even if we find proof, what then? You take it to Calhoun? He already knows. Take it to Halbrook? He'll bury it. There's no law here, Clara, just men with guns and money deciding who gets to exist." "Then we make them see us," Clara said. The words came out harder than she intended, sharp with something she didn't recognize in herself. Anger, maybe, or just exhaustion so deep it had turned into fuel. Rowan stopped pacing. "You're talking about a fight." "I'm talking about not rolling over." He studied her, eyes narrowed. Then he nodded once. "All right, but we do this smart. No mistakes." They started with the fire. Clara walked through the ruins at first light, picking through charred wood and melted glass, looking for anything that might tell a story. Rowan came with her, moving carefully, eyes scanning the ground. "Here," he said, crouching near what used to be the back entrance. He pointed to a scorched piece of cloth snagged on a nail. It was coarse, probably from a work shirt. Not Clara's, not Rowan's. She knelt beside him. Someone came through the back. Before the fire started, Rowan pulled the cloth free, studied it. "This isn't burn damage. It tore when they climbed through. So they broke in first, then set the fire to cover it." He stood, tucking the cloth into his pocket. "We need to find out who wears shirts like this. Half the men in town. Then we narrow it down." They spent the next 2 days watching. Rowan kept working at the livery, but now he paid attention: who came and went, who talked to who had burns on their hands or soot on their boots. Clara walked the town, quiet and invisible again, listening to conversations in the general store, the saloon, the church steps. On the third day, she heard something. 2 ranch hands from Greer's outfit standing outside the saloon, voices low, but not low enough. "Shame about that fire," one said. "Yeah, shame." The other one grinned. "Heard it went up real quick." Almost like someone knew where to start it. They laughed. Clara's stomach twisted. She wanted to confront them, to demand answers. But she kept walking, head down, heart pounding. That night, she told Rowan. "Greer's men," he said. Not a question, a statement. "I think so, but I can't prove it." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, grabbed his coat. "Where are you going?" Clara asked. "To get proof." "Rowan?" But he was already out the door. Clara sat there, panic clawing at her chest. She told him they needed to be smart, careful. And now he was out there doing exactly what Halbrook wanted, acting on impulse, giving them an excuse. She waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The night deepened, and still Rowan didn't come back. Finally, just before dawn, the door opened. Rowan stepped inside, face grim, knuckles bloody. He dropped something on the table, a leather satchel, worn and stained. "What is this?" Clara asked. "Open it." She did. Inside were papers, dozens of them, contracts, land deeds, letters stamped with official seals. She pulled one out, squinting at the handwriting. It was a deed transfer for her property, dated 2 weeks before the fire, signed by Judge Edwin Halbrook. Her hands shook. How did you get this? Greer's office. He keeps records of everything, thinks he's untouchable. Rowan sat down heavily. He's been planning this for months, buying up land, forcing people out, forging documents when he had to. Your store was just the latest. Clara spread the papers across the table, reading through them with growing horror. Deeds for properties all over Iron Hollow. Some signed willingly, others clearly coerced. And at the center of it all, Halbrook's signature over and over, legitimizing theft with the stroke of a pen. This is enough, Clara whispered. This proves everything. Rowan shook his head. It proves Greer's dirty, but Halbrook's a judge. He'll claim the documents are legal, that you stole them, that we're lying. Then we take it to someone higher, the territorial governor, someone who can remove him. That'll take weeks, maybe months, and in the meantime, they'll come after us harder. Clara looked at him, saw the exhaustion carved into his face. You got into a fight. 2 of Greer's men. They saw me leaving. He flexed his bloody knuckles. I didn't kill them, but I didn't walk away clean either. Clara's chest tightened. Rowan, I know, I broke the contract. 1 act of violence and you lose everything. He met her eyes. I'm sorry. She wanted to be angry, wanted to scream at him for being reckless, for giving Halbrook exactly what he needed. But looking at the papers spread across her table, proof of a conspiracy that had destroyed lives, proof they'd never have gotten any other way, she couldn't. We still have time, Clara said. They don't know you took these yet. If we move fast, a knock at the door cut her off. They both froze. It was barely past dawn. No one knocked at dawn unless something was wrong. Rowan stood, positioning himself between Clara and the door. Who is it? Sheriff Calhoun. Clara's blood went cold. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he opened the door. Calhoun stood on the step, hat in hand, face grave. Behind him, the street was empty. No deputies, no crowd. Miss Vance, Blackridge. Calhoun's eyes flicked to Rowan's bloody knuckles. Mind if I come in? Yes, Rowan said. I'm coming in anyway. Calhoun stepped past him, glanced around the small room, saw the papers on the table. His expression didn't change. You've been busy. Clara moved to block the table. What do you want? To warn you. Greer knows someone broke into his office. He's claiming it was Blackridge. Says he has witnesses who saw him leaving. Witnesses he paid, Rowan said flatly. Probably, but that doesn't matter. Halbrook's already drafting a warrant. By noon, I'll have to arrest you. Calhoun looked at Clara. And when I do, your contract is void. You'll lose the land, the house, everything. Clara's legs felt weak. You could refuse, tell them you won't do it. Then I lose my badge, and someone else arrests him anyway. Calhoun sighed. I didn't come here to gloat, Miss Vance. I came to give you a choice. Run. Both of you. Take those papers and run. Get to the territorial capital. Show them to someone who matters. It's your only chance. If we run, we're admitting guilt, Clara said. If you stay, you're dead. Rowan stepped forward. Why are you helping us? Calhoun was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by bad ones. I can't stop Halbrook, can't touch Greer, but I can give you a head start. That's all I've got. Clara looked at the papers, at Rowan, at the small room that had become her entire world. Running meant leaving Iron Hollow, leaving the only home she'd ever known. But staying meant losing anyway, losing to men who'd already won 100 times before. How long do we have? She asked. Till noon, maybe less if Greer pushes. Calhoun put his hat back on. If you're smart, you'll be gone in an hour. He left. The door swung shut. Clara and Rowan stood in the silence. We should go, Rowan said quietly. Clara shook her head. No. Clara, they want us to run. That's the whole point. If we run, we look guilty. And even if we make it to the capital, even if we show these papers to the governor, Halbrook will spin it. He'll say we're liars, criminals, desperate. And without witnesses, without someone from Iron Hollow backing us up, it's our word against the judges. Rowan's face was hard. Then what do you want to do? Clara looked at the papers again. An idea was forming, reckless and half-formed, but it was better than nothing. We force their hand, she said. We make this public, in front of everyone, so they can't hide. How? Town meeting, tomorrow night. Everyone gathers at the church once a month to settle disputes. We bring these papers. We show them what Halbrook and Greer have been doing. Let the town decide. Rowan stared at her. You think they'll side with us? I think some of them will. The ones who've lost land, the ones who've been squeezed. If we can get even a few people to stand with us, it changes the game. And if no one does, Claire's voice didn't waver, then at least we tried. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. All right, but we need insurance. What kind? A witness. Someone Halbrook can't touch. Someone people trust. He paused. I know someone, up in the hills, old trapper named Samuel Cord. He's been here longer than anyone, seen everything. If he backs us, it'll mean something. Will he? If I ask. Rowan grabbed his coat. I'll leave now. Be back by tonight. Rowan, if Calhoun arrests you, he won't. Not yet. Halbrook wants this done clean. A warrant, a trial. All the trappings of law. That takes time. He paused at the door. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Then he was gone, slipping out into the gray morning. Clara sat alone with the papers, heart pounding. She'd just committed to the biggest gamble of her life. And if it failed, she'd lose everything. But maybe for the first time, she'd be losing on her own terms. The day crawled by. Clara organized the papers, read through every document, memorized names and dates. Some of the deeds went back years. Families she recognized, people who'd left town suddenly, quietly, without explanation. Now she knew why. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Clara heard shouting outside. She moved to the window, careful to stay hidden, and looked out. A crowd had gathered in the street. 20, maybe 30 people. Some carried torches. Others held tools, axes, hammers, lengths of chain. At the front stood Thomas Greer, tall and commanding, voice booming. She's harboring a criminal, he shouted. Blackridge broke into my office, assaulted my men, and she's protecting him. The crowd murmured. Some looked angry, others uncertain. Sheriff Calhoun stood off to the side, arms crossed, face unreadable. Judge Halbrook stepped forward, smooth and calm. Miss Vance, we know you're in there. Send Blackridge out, and this ends peacefully. Refuse, and we'll have no choice but to enter by force. Clara's hands shook. Rowan wasn't here. Wouldn't be back for hours. She was alone. She could give up. Open the door, tell them Rowan was gone, hand over the papers, save herself. But she'd spent her whole life giving up. Being small, being quiet, being nothing. Not anymore. Clara opened the door. The crowd went silent. Greer's eyes narrowed. Halbrook's smile widened. He's not here, Clara said. Her voice was steady, louder than she expected. Where is he? Greer demanded. I don't know, and I wouldn't tell you if I did. Halbrook stepped closer. Miss Vance, you're in violation of your contract. Blackridge committed a crime. That makes you responsible. He committed a crime? Clara's anger flared, sharp and hot. You burned my store. You forged documents. You've been stealing land from people for years, and you call him a criminal? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Halbrook's smile faded. Careful, Miss Vance. Slander is... I have proof. Clara pulled a single document from her pocket, held it up. Deeds, contracts, all signed by you, all illegal. Greer's face went red. She's lying. She stole those papers from your office because you had them, because you've been working together. Clara looked at the crowd. Some of the faces were familiar, people she'd sold flour to, people who'd ignored her after the hanging. Now they were listening. You think this is just about me? Clara's voice cracked, raw with emotion. Halbrook and Greer have been doing this to everyone. The Simmons family, gone. The Pryor ranch, foreclosed. How many of you have lost something and didn't know why? A man in the back spoke up. My brother lost his land last year. Judge said it was legal. A woman nodded. Same with my uncle. The murmurs grew louder. Halbrook's jaw tightened. This is absurd, he said. A desperate woman making wild accusations. Then let's settle it. Clara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Town meeting, tomorrow night. I'll bring the proof. You defend yourself. Let everyone decide. Halbrook stared at her. For the first time, his composure cracked. Just for a second. Then it was back, smooth as ever. Very well, he said quietly. Tomorrow night. But if you're wrong, Miss Vance, if these accusations are baseless, you'll face consequences. I'm not wrong, Halbrook smiled. We'll see. The crowd dispersed slowly, uncertain, murmuring among themselves. Greer shot Clara a look of pure hatred before stalking off. Calhoun lingered, caught her eye, gave the smallest nod. Then she was alone again. Clara closed the door, locked it, and collapsed against the wall. Her legs gave out and she slid to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. She'd done it. Forced their hand, but now she had to deliver. Rowan returned just after dark. He had someone with him, an old man, thin and wiry, with a face like tanned leather and eyes sharp as broken glass. Samuel Cord. Heard what happened, Cord said, his voice rough as gravel. Half the territory's talking about it. Clara stood, legs still unsteady. Will you help? Cord looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I've known Halbrook's kind my whole life. Men who twist the law to suit themselves. About time someone stood up. He glanced at Rowan. You sure about this, boy? No, Rowan said. But we're doing it anyway. Cord grinned, showing gaps where teeth used to be. Good. I like bad odds. They spent the night preparing. Cord had seen Halbrook operate before, knew his tricks. He'll try to discredit you, Cord said. Make you look hysterical, unreliable. You need to stay calm. Stick to facts. Don't let him bait you. Clara nodded, memorizing every word. As dawn broke, Rowan pulled her aside. You don't have to do this. We can still run. Clara shook her head. I'm done running. Even if it kills you? She met his eyes. Even then. Something shifted in Rowan's face. Respect. Maybe more. All right, he said quietly. Then we finish this. The town meeting was held at the church, the only building big enough to hold everyone. By sundown, the pews were packed. Families, workers, ranchers, even people from neighboring settlements who'd heard the rumors. Clara stood at the front, papers clutched in her hands. Rowan stood beside her, silent and steady. Samuel Cord sat in the front row, arms crossed, watching. Judge Halbrook entered last, flanked by Greer and 2 hired guns. He smiled at the crowd like this was a social gathering. Shall we begin? He said smoothly. Clara stepped forward. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. I'm here to show you what's been happening in Iron Hollow, what Judge Halbrook and Thomas Greer have been doing to us. She laid out the papers, one by one. Forged deeds, coerced sales, legal traps designed to steal land, names and dates, everything. The crowd listened in stunned silence. When she finished, Halbrook stood. A compelling story, Miss Vance, but stories aren't proof. These documents could be forgeries. You could have created them yourself. I didn't. Can you prove that? Clara hesitated. That was the crack Halbrook needed. Furthermore, Halbrook continued, his voice rising, you're harboring a known criminal, a man who broke into private property, assaulted innocent men, and violated the terms of your contract. Anything you say is tainted by your association with him. The crowd murmured. Doubt crept back in. Then Samuel Cord stood. I've lived in this territory 50 years, Cord said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I watched Iron Hollow grow from nothing, and I've watched men like you destroy it. Halbrook's smile faded. Mr. Cord, your opinions, I was there when you pressured the Simmons family to sell. I saw the documents you filed, same forgeries as these. I kept my mouth shut because I'm old and tired and figured it wasn't my fight. Cord looked at Clara. I was wrong. It's everyone's fight. The crowd shifted. People were listening. Halbrook's face went cold. You're mistaken, old man. I'm a lot of things. Mistaken ain't one of them. Greer stepped forward, hand on his gun. Enough of this. You want proof? Here's proof. Blackridge is a murderer. He killed my men, burned her store to cover it up, and she's protecting him. That's a lie, Rowan said. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. Greer turned to him. You calling me a liar? Yes. The tension snapped tight. Every eye was on them now. Then prove it, Greer said, smiling. Prove you didn't kill those men. Rowan's jaw tightened. I didn't kill anyone. Your men are alive, bruised maybe, but alive. Then where are they? Silence. Halbrook seized on it. You see, he can't answer because he knows the truth. Clara's heart sank. They'd walked right into it. Then the church door opened. Two men stumbled in, faces bruised, arms bandaged. Greer's ranch hands, the ones Rowan had fought. The crowd gasped. One of the men looked at Greer, fear in his eyes. He told us to say we were dead, to hide until after the meeting. Greer's face went white. Shut your mouth. He paid us, the other man said, voice shaking. Said if we lied, we'd get a bonus, but I ain't dying for him. Not for this. The room erupted. Shouts, accusations, chaos. Halbrook tried to regain control, but it was too late. The truth was out, ugly and undeniable. Sheriff Calhoun stepped forward, hand on his gun. Edwin Halbrook, Thomas Greer, you're both under arrest. Greer's hand went to his weapon. The hired guns flanking him moved too, and just like that, everything exploded. The first gunshot cracked through the church like thunder splitting the sky. Wood splintered above Clara's head as she dove behind the front pew, paper scattering across the floor. Screams erupted. People scrambled for the exits, trampling over each other in their panic. Rowan was already moving. He grabbed Clara's arm, hauled her toward the side door as another shot rang out. The bullet punched through a stained glass window, sending colored shards raining down. Stay low, Rowan shouted over the chaos. Calhoun had his revolver drawn, aimed at Greer's hired guns. Drop your weapons. One of the gunmen fired. Calhoun ducked, returned fire. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, each shot reverberating off the walls like a war drum. Greer was backing toward the rear exit, shoving people out of his way. Halbrook had already disappeared into the crowd, slipping away like smoke. Rowan pulled Clara through the side door and into the alley. The cool night air hit her face, sharp and jarring. Her ears rang. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't feel her fingers. We have to go back, she gasped. The papers. Forget the papers. We need to move. Rowan, he spun on her, eyes hard. They just tried to kill us. In a church. In front of everyone. You think they're going to stop now? Clara's stomach lurched. He was right. The moment those shots fired, everything changed. This wasn't about contracts or land anymore. This was survival. They ran. Behind them, the chaos continued. More gunfire, shouting, the sound of horses being whipped into motion. Clara's lungs burned, her legs screaming as Rowan dragged her through the darkened streets of Iron Hollow. They made it to her house. Rowan kicked the door open, pulled her inside, slammed it shut, and threw the bolt. He moved to the window, peering out through a crack in the boards. They'll come here, he said, soon as they regroup. Clara leaned against the wall, gasping for air. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. The meeting was supposed to expose them, force them into the light. Instead, it had turned into a bloodbath. Samuel, she said suddenly, did you see? He got out, saw him slip through the back before the shooting started. Rowan's jaw was tight. Old man's tougher than he looks. Clara wanted to believe that, wanted to believe something good had survived the wreckage. But all she could see was the fear on people's faces as they'd stampeded for the exits, the way Halbrook had vanished, the cold calculation in Greer's eyes when he'd drawn his weapon. What do we do now? Her voice came out small, broken. Rowan turned from the window. For a moment, he didn't answer, just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between regret and resolve. I leave, he said finally. Clara's chest tightened. What? This is my fault. They want me. If I'm gone, they'll leave you alone. You don't know that. I do. Halbrook needs a villain. Right now, I'm it. But if I disappear, he can spin this however he wants. Say I killed those men after all. Say I manipulated you. You'll still lose the land, but you'll be alive. Clara shook her head, anger flaring through the fear. So that's it? You just run? Leave me to deal with the mess? It's not running if it saves your life. It's exactly running. She stepped toward him, fists clenched. You think I did all this just to watch you disappear into the hills? I didn't save you so you could keep being alone. Rowan's face twisted. You shouldn't have saved me at all. Well, I did, and now we're stuck together. So stop trying to make decisions for me and start thinking like we're on the same side. He stared at her, something raw and painful in his eyes. I've never been on anyone's side. I don't know how. Then learn. The words hung between them, sharp and desperate. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Voices shouted. Torches flickered past the window. They were coming. Rowan moved fast. He grabbed his pack, shoved a blanket and what little food they had inside. If we're doing this, we do it smart. We can't stay here, can't stay in Iron Hollow. Where do we go? The canyon. There's caves up there, defensible. They won't find us if we're careful. Clara grabbed her own pack, threw in the few possessions she still owned. A change of clothes, her father's old knife, the tin cup Rowan had given her coffee in that first morning. Strange, what you grabbed when everything was falling apart. They slipped out the back just as the front door splintered inward. Clara didn't look back. Didn't let herself think about the house she was leaving behind, the life she'd tried to build. All of it was ash now anyway. They moved through the shadows, keeping to the edges of town, avoiding the main streets where torches burned and angry voices called for blood. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it would crack her ribs. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. But Rowan moved like he was born to this, silent, efficient, reading the darkness like other people read books. He led her through alleys she didn't know existed, over fences, through a dry creek bed that cut behind the livery. They were almost clear when someone stepped out in front of them. Sheriff Calhoun. Rowan's hand went to his belt, where he kept a knife. Calhoun raised his hands, showing he was unarmed. Easy, Calhoun said quietly. I'm not here to stop you. Rowan didn't relax. Then what do you want? To tell you what you're up against. Calhoun glanced back toward town. Hal Brooks declared martial law. Says there was an attempted insurrection. He's got Greer's men patrolling the streets, rounding up anyone who spoke in your favor at the meeting. Clara's blood went cold. He can't do that. He just did. And unless the territorial governor steps in, he'll get away with it. Calhoun pulled something from his coat, a folded piece of paper. This is a letter, official testimony. Everything I saw tonight, everything I know about Halbrook and Greer. It won't hold up in Iron Hollow, but if you can get it to the Capitol... You're giving us evidence? Rowan's voice was flat, suspicious. Why? Calhoun's face was hard. Because I'm tired of being part of the problem. I've looked the other way too many times. Let too many things slide because it was easier than fighting. Not this time. He held out the letter. Take it. Get out of here. And don't come back until you have an army behind you. Clara took the letter, hands shaking. Thank you. Calhoun's expression softened for just a moment. Don't thank me yet. You've got a long road ahead. He looked at Rowan. Keep her alive. Rowan nodded once. Then Calhoun was gone, disappearing back into the darkness. They ran. The canyon was 3 miles outside town, a jagged scar cut into the earth by centuries of water and wind. Rowan led Clara up a narrow trail, barely visible in the moonlight, climbing until her legs screamed and her lungs felt like they'd collapse. Finally, he stopped at a cave mouth hidden behind a fall of rocks. Here. Inside, the cave was dry and surprisingly spacious. Rowan lit a small fire near the entrance, just enough to cut the chill but not enough to be seen from below. Clara collapsed against the wall, every muscle in her body trembling. She'd never been this exhausted, this terrified, this far from everything she'd ever known. Rowan sat across from her, staring into the fire. His face was shadowed, unreadable. You should sleep, he said. I can't. Try. Clara closed her eyes, but all she saw was the chaos in the church, the gunfire, the fear. She opened them again, found Rowan watching her. What? She asked. You did good tonight. Calling that meeting, standing up to them. That took guts. A lot of good it did. It did more than you think. People saw, they heard. Even if Halbrook tries to bury it, they'll remember. Clara wanted to believe that, but right now, sitting in a cave, hunted and homeless, it was hard to see past the disaster. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Rowan frowned. For what? For dragging you into this. You were right. I should have let you run. Now you're stuck with me and we're both... Stop. Rowan's voice was firm. You didn't drag me anywhere. I made my choice, and I'd make it again. Clara looked at him, saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not just resolve, something softer, almost vulnerable. "Why?" she whispered. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because for the first time in 10 years, someone looked at me and saw a person instead of a problem. That's worth fighting for." Clara's throat burned. She didn't know what to say, didn't trust herself to speak. So she just nodded. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, until exhaustion finally dragged Clara under. She woke to daylight filtering through the cave entrance and the smell of something cooking. Rowan had caught a rabbit, was roasting it over the fire. "You know how to hunt?" Clara asked, voice thick with sleep. "Lived in these hills for years. If I couldn't hunt, I'd be dead." Clara sat up, rubbed her face. Her body ached everywhere. "How long was I out?" "Few hours. Sun's been up since dawn." She looked toward the cave mouth, saw the valley spread out below. From here, Iron Hollow looked small, insignificant, just a cluster of buildings clinging to the earth like it didn't want to let go. "What's the plan?" she asked. Rowan tore off a piece of meat, handed it to her. "We wait. Let things cool down. Then we figure out how to get to the capital without getting killed. That's not much of a plan. It's what we've got." Clara ate in silence, chewing the tough meat, trying to think. They had Calhoun's letter. That was something. But getting to the territorial capital meant crossing 300 miles of open country. No horses, no supplies, and Greer's men would be looking for them. It was impossible, which meant they had to do it anyway. "We'll need help," Clara said. "We can't make it alone." "Who's going to help us? Everyone in Iron Hollow's either terrified of Halbrook or working for him." "Not everyone." Clara thought of the faces at the meeting, the people who'd listened, who'd looked at the evidence and started to believe. There were people on our side, people who spoke up, and now they're probably locked up or worse. Then we find the ones who aren't. Rowan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You want to go back?" "Not into town, but nearby. There are homesteads, families who've been squeezed by Greer. If we can rally them, they'll get killed. Or they'll fight back." Clara met his eyes. "You said people saw, that they'd remember. But if we just run, Halbrook wins. He buries the truth and keeps taking what he wants, unless we give them a reason to stand." Rowan shook his head. "You're talking about starting a war. I'm talking about finishing one." He stared at her, jaw working. Then he let out a long breath. "You've changed." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just done being scared." Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. We do it your way. But we're careful. One mistake, and we're both dead." "I know." They spent the next 3 days moving carefully through the hills, avoiding the main roads, watching for patrols. Rowan knew the land better than anyone, every trail, every water source, every place to hide. He taught Clara how to move quietly, how to read tracks, how to survive on next to nothing. She learned fast, had to. Out here, mistakes were fatal. They found the first homestead on the 4th day, a small ranch, run down and struggling, tucked into a valley west of Iron Hollow. A man named Josiah Reeve lived there with his wife and 2 sons. Clara had sold him supplies once, years ago. Rowan approached carefully, hands visible, calling out before they got close. The last thing they needed was to get shot by a nervous farmer. Josiah came out with a rifle, eyes hard. When he saw Clara, recognition flickered across his face. "Miss Vance?" "Mr. Reeve, I need to talk to you." He lowered the rifle slightly. "Heard you're wanted. For stirring up trouble." "Heard right, but the trouble wasn't mine. It was Halbrook's." Josiah's wife appeared in the doorway, a thin woman with tired eyes. "What do you want?" Clara pulled out Calhoun's letter. "To show you the truth, and to ask for your help." They talked for hours. Clara laid it all out. The forged documents, the land grabs, the conspiracy. Rowan stayed quiet, watchful, but his presence added weight to her words. This wasn't just a desperate woman. This was someone who'd fought back and survived. Josiah read the letter, read it twice. Then he looked at his wife. "Halbrook took my brother's land 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Used some legal trick I didn't understand. My brother ended up working for Greer just to feed his family." His wife nodded. "We've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. Figured it was only a matter of time before he came for us, too. Then help us stop him, Clara said. Spread the word, get people together. We're going to the capital, but we need time. Need Halbrook distracted. Josiah looked at Rowan. You really didn't kill anyone? No. But you'd fight if you had to? Rowan's face was stone. If I had to. Josiah nodded slowly, then he held out his hand. All right, we're in. They found 3 more families over the next week. Not all of them agreed to help. Some were too scared. Others didn't believe the evidence, thought it was a trick. But a few, enough, said yes. Word spread. Quietly. Carefully. A network of people who'd been pushed too far and were finally ready to push back. By the time Clara and Rowan made it back to the cave, they had a plan. Not a good one. But it was something. We leave tomorrow, Rowan said. Head for the capital. Move fast, stick to the hills. If we're lucky, we'll make it in 2 weeks. Clara nodded. She was exhausted, filthy, running on fumes and stubbornness, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That night, as they sat by the fire, Clara asked the question that had been gnawing at her since the beginning. Why did they want you dead, really? Rowan's face went dark. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, voice low. Because I owned land. Good land. Up in the high country, near the springs. I didn't farm it, didn't build on it, just lived there. Quiet. Alone. He paused. Greer wanted it. Made me an offer. I said no. Then suddenly there's a dead rancher's son, and everyone's saying I did it. Did you know the son? Never met him. But that didn't matter. They needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient. His hands clenched. I would have hanged, and Greer would have taken the land the next day. Clara's chest ached. I'm sorry. Don't be. You're the only reason I'm still breathing. She looked at him across the firelight, this man she barely knew but had risked everything for. And she realized something. She'd do it again. They left at first light. The journey to the capital was brutal. Long days of walking, sleeping in ditches, scrounging for food. Twice they spotted patrols and had to hide, pressed flat against the earth, barely breathing as horses thundered past. But they kept moving. On the 10th day, they reached a river crossing. Rowan stopped, staring at the far bank. What is it? Clara asked. Once we cross, there's no going back. We commit to this, and either we win or we die trying. Clara looked at the water, swift and cold. Then she looked at Rowan. I'm not going back anyway. He nodded. Neither am I. They crossed together. The capital appeared on the horizon 2 days later. A sprawling city compared to Iron Hollow, with stone buildings and paved streets, and people who moved with purpose. Clara felt small and out of place, covered in dust and wearing clothes that had seen better days. But she had Calhoun's letter, and she had the truth. They found the territorial governor's office in the center of town, a large building with pillars and flags and guards at the door. Clara's stomach churned. Ready? Rowan asked. No. Good, let's go. They walked up the steps together. The guards stopped them, looked them up and down with barely concealed disdain. We need to see the governor, Clara said. You have an appointment? No, but we have evidence of corruption in Iron Hollow. Judge Edwin Halbrook has been... Take it up with the local sheriff. The sheriff sent us here. Clara pulled out Calhoun's letter, thrust it at the guard. Read it, please. The guard took the letter, glanced at it, then handed it back. I'm not a secretary. If you have a complaint, file it with the clerk's office. They'll schedule a hearing in a few months. Clara's chest tightened. A few months? People are being hurt now, right now. Then you should have filed sooner. Rowan stepped forward, and the guard's hand went to his weapon. Easy, mountain man. Clara grabbed Rowan's arm, pulled him back. Please, just give the letter to the governor. Let him decide. The guard's face was stone. Move along. They were being dismissed, cast aside. Just like in Iron Hollow, power protected itself, and people like Clara didn't matter. Rowan's fists clenched. Clara saw the rage building in him, the same rage that had probably gotten him in trouble his whole life. And then she saw something else. A woman descending the steps. Well-dressed, mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a purposeful stride. She'd been watching the exchange, Clara realized, listening. The woman stopped in front of them. I'm Margaret Coulter, Governor's chief advisor. She looked at Clara. I heard you mention Edwin Halbrook. Clara's heart leapt. Yes, he's been... I know what he's been doing. I've had suspicions for months, but no proof. Coulter held out her hand. May I see that letter? Clara handed it over, barely breathing. Coulter read it. Her face remained neutral, but her eyes hardened. When she finished, she looked up. Come with me. They followed her inside, through marble halls and past offices filled with clerks and officials. Clara felt like she'd stepped into another world, a world of power and procedure and people who decided the fates of towns like Iron Hollow without ever setting foot there. Coulter led them to a private office, closed the door, and gestured for them to sit. Tell me everything, she said. So Clara did. She laid it all out. The hanging, the contract, the fire, the forged documents, the meeting, the gunfight. Rowan filled in details, his voice flat and factual. Together they painted a picture of corruption so complete it was almost unbelievable. Almost. When they finished, Coulter sat back, fingers steepled. If what you're saying is true, Edwin Halbrook has committed multiple felonies, but proving it will be difficult. He's a territorial judge. He has allies, resources. We have evidence, Clara said. You have a letter from a small-town sheriff and testimony from two people Halbrook will paint as criminals. Coulter's voice was gentle but firm. I believe you, but belief isn't enough in court. Clara's heart sank. They'd come all this way, risked everything, and it still wasn't enough. Then Coulter leaned forward. However, if I can get a federal marshal involved, that changes things. Marshals have jurisdiction over territorial judges, and I happen to know one who's been looking for a reason to investigate Halbrook. How long will that take? Rowan asked. A week? Maybe 2. I'll send a telegram today. Clara wanted to collapse with relief. But 2 weeks meant 2 more weeks of Halbrook tightening his grip on Iron Hollow. 2 more weeks of people suffering. In the meantime, Coulter said, you need to stay out of sight. If Halbrook finds out you're here, he'll send people. And I can't protect you outside this building. Rowan nodded. We'll manage. Coulter stood, extended her hand. You did a brave thing, Miss Vance, coming here, speaking up. A lot of people wouldn't have. Clara shook her hand, throat tight. I just want it to stop. It will. I promise you that. They left the office, stepped back out into the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Clara looked at Rowan. We did it. Not yet, but we're close. She nodded. Close was enough, for now. They found a boarding house on the edge of town, paid for a room with the last of their money. It was small and plain, but it had a real bed and walls and a door that locked. Clara sat on the bed, feeling the weight of the past weeks crash down on her all at once. They'd survived. Made it to the capital, found someone who would help. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Rowan stood by the window, looking out at the street below. Halbrook won't go quietly. I know. When the marshal comes, there'll be a fight. I know that too. He turned to look at her. You ready for it? Clara thought about everything she'd lost. Her store, her home, her quiet, invisible life. And she thought about everything she'd found. Strength she didn't know she had, a purpose that burned brighter than fear. Yes, she said. I'm ready. Rowan's face softened, just a fraction. Then we finish this together. Clara nodded. Together. The telegram arrived on the 8th day. Clara was sitting by the window of their cramped boarding house room, mending one of Rowan's shirts with thread she'd bought using their last few coins, when he returned with a folded piece of paper in his hand and something that might have been relief crossing his weathered face. Marshal's coming, he said, closing the door behind him. Leaves tomorrow morning. Should reach Iron Hollow in 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather turns. Clara's hand stilled on the fabric, needles suspended mid-stitch. 3 days. After weeks of running, hiding, fighting just to stay alive, it all came down to 72 more hours. Margaret Coulter wants us back there, Rowan continued, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. Says Marshal Pierce will need us to testify. Show him the locations, point out the evidence we found. Clara set down the mending, her fingers trembling slightly. Going back to Iron Hollow meant walking straight into Halbrook's domain, into the town where half the population wanted them dead, and the other half was too terrified to speak up. You don't have to come, Rowan said quietly. He wasn't looking at her, just staring at his scarred hands. I can handle this part. Tell them what we know. You could stay here. Be safe. Stop trying to protect me. I'm trying to keep you breathing." Clara stood, crossed to where he sat, and waited until he looked up at her. "I started this when I stepped into that street and opened my mouth. I'm not hiding while you finish it." Rowan studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he saw there made him nod once, sharp and final. "All right, we leave at first light." That night, Clara lay awake in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city outside their window. Carriages rattling past, voices calling to each other, the distant clang of a bell marking the hours. She'd spent her whole life in Iron Hollow, where the only sounds after dark were wind and coyotes and the occasional drunk stumbling home from the saloon. This place felt alien, too big, too loud, too full of people who didn't know her name and wouldn't care if they did. But it also felt like possibility, like proof that the world was bigger than one dusty frontier town controlled by corrupt men. "Can't sleep?" Rowan's voice came from the floor where he'd made his pallet. "No." "What's keeping you up?" Claire was quiet for a moment, trying to put the tangle of thoughts into words. "I keep thinking about what happens after, if we win. You go home, rebuild your store, live your life. With what money? What customers? Half the town branded me a traitor, Rowan. The other half watched my store burn and did nothing. You think they're just going to forget that? Start shopping at Clara's store again like nothing happened?" She heard him shift in the darkness. "Some of them will, the ones who spoke up at the meeting, the families who've been getting squeezed by Greer for years. They'll remember you stood when nobody else would. And the rest? The rest will have to live with knowing they were cowards." Clara wanted to believe that mattered, that shame and guilt would change anything. But she'd lived too long in Iron Hollow to think people were that simple. "I've got land," Rowan said after a pause. "Up in the high country, near the springs. Good water, decent hunting, space enough to build something. If Halbrook goes down, the deed's still mine. Can't take that away." Clara's throat tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you don't have to go back to Iron Hollow if you don't want to. There are other places, other ways to live." He paused. "And if you needed somewhere to start over, my door's open. Not charity, partnership. You saved my life. Figure that's worth more than just empty words." Clara closed her eyes against the sudden burning behind them. In all her years, no one had offered her anything without strings attached. Every kindness came with obligations, with debts that had to be repaid in work or loyalty or silence. But Rowan wasn't like that. He'd already proven it a dozen times over. "I'll think about it," she whispered. "That's all I'm asking." They traveled back with Marshal Garrett Pierce and 4 of his deputies. Pierce was a man in his 50s with gray threading through his dark beard and eyes that had seen enough ugliness to recognize it on sight. He rode alongside Clara and Rowan, asking careful questions and listening to the answers with the kind of attention that made Clara feel like maybe, finally, someone with real authority was taking this seriously. "Edwin Halbrook's got a reputation in the territory," Pierce said as they crossed into familiar landscape. "Clean record on paper, respected by his peers. But I've heard whispers for the past year. Judges don't get rich on government salaries, and Halbrook's been living well above what he should be able to afford." "Because he's been stealing," Clara said bluntly, "from everyone too small or too scared to fight back." Pierce nodded slowly. "I believe you, Miss Vance, but believing and proving are 2 different animals in a courtroom. That's why I need you to show me everything. The burned store, the forged documents, any witnesses willing to testify on record." "Some of them might be too frightened," Rowan said. "Halbrook's had weeks to consolidate power, threaten people, make examples. Then my job is to make it safe enough for them to talk." Pierce's voice carried the weight of someone who'd done this before and knew exactly how ugly it could get. "That's why I brought 4 good men and enough federal authority to override any local objection." They reached Iron Hollow just after midday. The town looked exactly the same as when Clara had fled. Sun-bleached buildings, dust hanging in the air like a curse, everything baked to the color of old bone. But the atmosphere had changed, quieter, tenser, like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. People saw them ride in, saw the federal marshal's badge glinting in the harsh sunlight. Some ducked inside buildings immediately. Others just stood and stared with expressions Clara couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or hope, or just the exhausted resignation of people who'd been beaten down too many times to trust that anything would ever change. She felt their eyes on her like physical weight, judgment, accusation, curiosity. She kept her spine straight and her hands steady on the reins, refusing to show the terror churning in her stomach. They went directly to Sheriff Calhoun's office. He was there, looking like he'd aged a decade in the 2 weeks since Clara had seen him. New lines carved into his face, shoulders hunched under an invisible burden. He stood when they entered. Marshal Pierce, Miss Vance, Black Ridge. He nodded to each in turn, something like relief flickering in his tired eyes. Didn't know if you'd make it back. Things been quiet here? Pierce asked, removing his hat. Calhoun's laugh was bitter and sharp. Quiet's not the word I'd use, Marshal. Halbrook's got this town locked down tighter than a jail cell. Anyone who spoke up at that meeting has either left Iron Hollow entirely or learned real quick to keep their mouths shut. Greer's men patrol the streets every night, making sure everyone remembers who's in charge. Where's Halbrook now? His office. Same as always. Probably already knows you're here. Nothing happens in this town without him hearing about it within the hour. Calhoun's jaw tightened. He's been expecting you, preparing. Pierce's eyes narrowed. Let him prepare. Won't change what's coming. They spent the afternoon methodically gathering evidence. Clara took the marshal to the ruins of her store, now nothing but a blackened foundation and scattered debris that the wind had started to bury. She showed him where the back door had been forced open before the fire started, where the flames had originated. The pattern of destruction that spoke of deliberate arson rather than accident. Rowan pointed out details Clara hadn't noticed, specific burn patterns that suggested accelerant had been used, footprints in the ash that were too large to be hers or Rowan's, a piece of charred rope that had been used to bar the front door from the outside. Someone had tried to trap her inside while the building burned. The realization hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd known the fire was intentional, but understanding that someone had actively tried to kill her, not just destroy her property but end her life, made her stomach turn. You all right? Rowan asked quietly, noticing her face had gone pale. Yeah, she lied. Just seeing it all laid out like this. Pierce documented everything in a small leather notebook, his expression growing harder with each new piece of evidence. Then they moved to the church, where bullet holes still scarred the wooden walls and pews. The congregation had cleaned up the blood and removed the shattered glass, but the damage remained, undeniable proof that armed men had opened fire in a house of worship with civilians present. How many people were inside when the shooting started? Pierce asked. Maybe 60, Clara said. Families, children, everyone who'd come to hear the truth about what Halbrook and Greer had been doing. And Halbrook's men fired anyway? Not at first. Greer drew his weapon when Sheriff Calhoun tried to arrest him. Then his hired guns followed. It happened fast after that. Pierce walked the length of the church, examining each bullet hole, calculating angles and trajectories. Anyone killed? No. Miracle, really. People stampeded for the exits. Got lucky. Luck. Pierce's voice was flat. Or maybe Greer's men weren't trying to kill anyone, just create enough chaos to escape. It was a small distinction, but Clara understood what he meant. In a courtroom, intent mattered. The difference between attempted murder and reckless endangerment, between decades in prison and a handful of years. By evening, Pierce had seen enough. I'm arresting Edwin Halbrook and Thomas Greer tomorrow at dawn, he announced. They were gathered in Calhoun's office. Clara, Rowan, the marshal, the sheriff, and Pierce's 4 deputies. We move early, before they have time to scatter or organize resistance. I'll need both of you there as witnesses. Clara's heart lurched. What if they fight back? Then we deal with it. Pierce's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. I've handled men like Halbrook before. They're bullies who've spent years convinced they're untouchable. Once you stand up to them, most fold pretty quick. Rowan didn't look convinced. Greer's got at least 15 men on his payroll, armed, loyal. They're not going to just let you walk onto his property and slap irons on him, which is why I didn't come alone. Pierce gestured to his deputies. We do this by the book, legal, proper, but with enough force that they understand resistance is pointless. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that law and order would triumph, that men with badges and federal authority could sweep in and fix everything with a few pieces of paper and some well-placed threats. But she'd learned the hard way that the world didn't work like fairy tales. Power protected itself, and powerful men rarely surrendered without a fight. That night, word spread through Iron Hollow faster than fire through dry grass. The federal marshals were here. They were going after Halbrook and Greer. Tomorrow morning, everything would change. Clara sat in the small room above the defunct general store that Calhoun had secured for them, listening to the town vibrate with tension. Rowan paced like a caged animal, that restless energy radiating off him in waves. "This feels wrong," he said finally, breaking the silence. "What do you mean? Too easy, too clean." Halbrook's smart. He didn't get this far by being stupid. He's had weeks to prepare for exactly this. You really think he's just going to sit in his office waiting to get arrested like some common drunk? Clara hadn't thought about it that way, but now that Rowan said it out loud, the unease that had been gnawing at her all day sharpened into something closer to dread. "What do you think he'll do?" Rowan stopped pacing and looked at her. "Run. Or fight. And if he fights, innocent people are going to die. That's what men like him do when they're cornered. They lash out, hurt whoever's closest, try to create enough chaos to slip away in the confusion." Before Clara could respond, boots thundered up the stairs. The door flew open, and one of Pierce's deputies stood there, breathing hard, face flushed. "Halbrook's gone. His office is empty. Looks like he cleared out hours ago. Took all his papers, everything." Clara's stomach dropped like a stone. "What about Greer?" "Still at his ranch as far as we know. We're mounting up to move on him now, but..." The deputy hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "There's something else." Halbrook left a message, nailed to his office door. "Addressed to you, Miss Vance." He handed Clara a folded piece of paper. She opened it with shaking hands. The handwriting was elegant, almost beautiful. The message was 3 sentences long. "You should have accepted my offer and left quietly. Now everyone in Iron Hollow will pay for your pride. Watch your town burn and know it's your fault." Clara's blood turned to ice. She looked at Rowan and saw the same terrible understanding dawn on his face. "He's going scorched earth," Rowan said quietly. The deputy looked between them. "What does that mean?" "It means he's not running," Rowan said, already grabbing his coat. "He's destroying everything on his way out. We need to warn people. Right now." They ran into the street just as the first explosion tore through the night air. The sound was massive, a bone-shaking boom that rattled windows and sent people stumbling from their homes in panic. Clara's ears rang as she spun toward the source of the blast. Flames erupted on the eastern edge of town, the livery stable where Rowan had worked. The entire structure collapsed inward, support beams cracking like rifle shots, the anguished screaming of trapped horses cutting through the chaos. Then another explosion. The saloon. Then the blacksmith's forge. Then the granary. Halbrook was systematically destroying Iron Hollow's infrastructure. People poured into the streets, screaming, panicked, running in every direction at once. Marshal Pierce was shouting orders, trying to organize a response, but chaos had already taken complete hold. Rowan grabbed Clara's arm hard enough to bruise. "We need to get to Greer's ranch, now. That's where Halbrook is. He's creating a distraction so he can escape." "What about the town? We can't just..." "The marshals will handle it. They have to. But if Halbrook gets away, everything we've done means nothing. He'll just set up somewhere else and do this all over again." Clara looked at the burning buildings, at terrified families running with children in their arms, at everything she'd known her whole life going up in flames. This was her fault. She'd pushed, forced the confrontation, refused to back down. And now people were paying the price for her stubbornness. "Clara," Rowan's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "We can't save everyone, but we can stop him from doing this again. That's what matters right now." She nodded, throat too tight to speak. They commandeered horses from Calhoun, 2 of the few that hadn't been trapped in the burning livery, and rode hard toward Greer's ranch. The night was alive with sound behind them. Screams, the crackle and roar of flames, more distant explosions as whatever Halbrook had planted continued to detonate. The ranch house sat 3 miles outside town, a sprawling compound with multiple outbuildings, corrals, and enough structures to house a small army. As they approached, Clara saw figures moving in the darkness. Armed men, waiting. "This is a trap," she said, pulling her horse to a stop. I know. Rowan didn't slow down. But it's the only move we've got. If we wait for reinforcements, they'll be gone. They dismounted a quarter-mile out, tied the horses to a scrub oak, and approached on foot. Rowan moved like a shadow, practiced and precise, and Clara did her best to follow his lead despite her hammering heart and shaking hands. They made it to the side of the main ranch house without being spotted. Through a lit window, Clara could see movement inside. Halbrook and Greer clearly visible, arguing with animated gestures. Completely insane, Greer's voice carried through the glass. You can't just burn an entire town. Watch me, Thomas. Halbrook's tone was cold, controlled, nothing like the smooth charm he'd always displayed in public. I built this empire from absolutely nothing, clawed my way up from poverty you can't even imagine. If I can't have it, then no one can. Simple as that. But the people, innocent people, are dying. Collateral damage? Necessary. The marshals will be too busy trying to save Iron Hollow to come after us immediately. By the time they regroup and figure out what happened, we'll be across the border with enough money to start fresh. New names, new town, same operation. Greer looked like he wanted to argue further, but he just nodded, defeated, all the fight gone out of him. Claire glanced at Rowan. We need to get word to Marshal Pierce. He needs to know they're still here. No time. If they leave in the next 10 minutes, we'll lose them forever. And I'm done running, done hiding. Rowan's jaw was set, his eyes hard. I'm ending this. Right here. Right now. He started moving toward the front door. Clara grabbed his arm, fingers digging in. Rowan, there are at least a dozen armed men in there. You'll get killed. Maybe. That's not good enough. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something like peace in his eyes. Resolution. I've spent 10 years in those hills alone because I was too afraid to be around people, too broken to trust anyone. You changed that, saved me, gave me a reason to care whether I lived or died. If stopping these bastards is what kills me, that's a trade I'll take. Better than dying for nothing. Clara's chest ached. You don't get to make that decision by yourself. Not anymore. We're partners, remember? Or was that just words? Rowan's expression softened slightly. Then what do you want me to do? Clara thought fast, her mind racing through terrible options. They couldn't fight a dozen armed men in a direct confrontation. Couldn't wait for reinforcements that might not arrive in time. But maybe they didn't need to. The explosions, Clara said. Halbrook's been using them to create chaos and confusion. What if we turn his own strategy against him? Rowan frowned. How? Clara pointed to the scattered outbuildings. They've got supplies out there. Gunpowder for blasting stumps, lamp oil for lanterns. If we can start a fire, make them think the marshals are here in force, they'll panic, might scatter, might make mistakes we can exploit. It was a terrible plan, dangerous and reckless and probably suicidal, but it was better than a frontal assault that would definitely get them killed. Rowan stared at her for a long moment. Then he grinned, wild and fierce. I really like the way you think. They split up. Rowan moved toward the supply shed on the north side of the compound while Clara circled around to the stables on the south end. Her hand shook violently as she grabbed a lantern hanging from a fence post, checked that it still had oil, and crept toward a large stack of hay bales near the horse corrals. She could hear voices inside the main house, footsteps on wooden floors, the metallic click of guns being loaded and checked. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Then Rowan's voice cut through the night, loud and commanding and absolutely fearless. Edwin Halbrook, Thomas Greer, this is the federal marshals. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up and no one else has to die tonight. Dead silence. Then absolute chaos. Men burst from the ranch house, shouting, weapons drawn, looking for targets in the darkness. Clara lit the lantern with shaking hands, threw it at the hay bales with all her strength. Flames caught instantly, roaring to life, casting wild dancing shadows across the entire compound. An explosion rocked the supply shed. Rowan's work. The massive blast sent men diving for cover, turned confusion into total panic. Clara ran, keeping low to the ground, circling around toward where she'd last seen Rowan. She found him crouched behind a water trough, methodically reloading a revolver he'd somehow acquired. Where did you get that? She gasped. Off a guy who wasn't watching his surroundings closely enough. He fired twice, aiming high over people's heads, just keeping them pinned down. This is working better than I expected, but we need to move before they figure out it's just the two of us and a lot of noise. Another explosion, this one from inside the main ranch house. Someone had panicked in the chaos, knocked over a lamp or candle, and now flames were spreading through the structure. Men poured out of the burning building, coughing, stumbling, some with shirts already smoldering. In the confusion and firelight, Clara spotted Halbrook and Greer making a break for the horses tied up near the back corral. "There!" she shouted, pointing. Rowan was already moving. He cut across the yard, fast and low, intercepting them before they could reach the animals. Halbrook spun, fumbling for the gun holstered at his hip, but Rowan was faster by half. He grabbed Halbrook's wrist, twisted hard, and the weapon clattered to the ground. Greer pulled his own gun, swung it around toward Rowan's unprotected back. Clara didn't think. Just grabbed a piece of burning wood from the ground and hurled it with everything she had. It hit Greer square in the chest, and he staggered backward, cursing, batting at the embers. That moment of distraction was all Rowan needed. He slammed Halbrook face first into the ground, planted a knee between his shoulder blades, and wrenched his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. "It's over," Rowan said, voice like gravel. "Done. Finished." Halbrook actually laughed. The sound was ugly, half choked by dust and smoke. "You think this changes anything? I've got money hidden, lawyers on retainer, connections that go all the way to the territorial governor. I'll be out of jail in a month, 6 weeks at most." Rowan leaned close, voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "Maybe, but everyone's going to know what you are now. Every person whose life you destroyed, every family you ruined, they'll all know. And that's worse than any prison cell. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when someone's going to decide that legal justice isn't enough." Footsteps thundered across the compound. Marshal Pierce and his deputies arrived, weapons drawn, taking in the burning chaos, the destroyed outbuildings, the smoldering ranch house. Rowan holding Halbrook down, while Clara stood over Greer with a piece of burning wood like some kind of avenging angel. Pierce looked at the scene for a long moment. Then he shook his head, something that might have been admiration crossing his face. "You two have a real talent for making things complicated." "We got results," Rowan said flatly. Pierce couldn't argue with that. His men moved in quickly and professionally, securing Halbrook and Greer, rounding up the scattered ranch hands. Some surrendered immediately. A few tried to run and were quickly caught by deputies who knew the terrain. Within 90 minutes, it was over. The fires were being contained and put out. The prisoners were in chains and shackles. Iron Hollow's reign of corruption and terror had ended not with a judge's gavel or a clean legal proceeding, but with smoke and flame and two people who'd simply refused to give up. Clara stood in the wreckage, utterly exhausted, covered in soot and ash, watching the sun begin its slow climb over the canyon. Rowan came to stand beside her, equally filthy, one arm hanging at an odd angle from where he'd hit the ground wrong during the fight. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Clara laughed. It came out shaky, half hysteria, but somehow genuine. "No, not even a little bit, but I will be. Eventually." They rode back to Iron Hollow as the sun climbed higher, painting the smoke-stained sky in shades of orange and red. The town was a disaster. Multiple buildings completely destroyed, others badly damaged, people displaced and traumatized. But it was still standing, bruised, battered, broken in places, but fundamentally alive. The trial took 3 weeks. Federal prosecutors arrived from the territorial capital, armed with the evidence Clara and Rowan had gathered, bolstered by testimony from people who finally felt safe enough to speak publicly. Halbrook hired expensive lawyers from back east, called in every favor he'd accumulated over the years, tried every legal trick and maneuver his counsel could devise. But the proof was overwhelming: forged documents with his signature, detailed financial records showing years of systematic theft. Witness after witness describing the same pattern of intimidation, coercion, and outright fraud. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Halbrook was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. Greer got 18. Their combined assets, land, money, property, everything, were seized by the territorial government and slowly, painstakingly distributed back to the people they'd stolen from. It wasn't perfect. Some families had already left the territory, their lives too shattered to rebuild even with compensation. Some of the land couldn't be easily returned to original owners. Some wounds were too deep to heal completely. But it was justice. Imperfect, messy, thoroughly human justice. Clara stood in front of the empty lot where her store had been, looking at the scorched earth and scattered debris. The territorial government had compensated her for the destruction, not enough to replace everything she'd lost, but enough to start over if she wanted to. She could rebuild here, open a new store, try to reclaim the quiet, predictable life she'd known before. Or she could do something different. Still thinking about it? Rowan's voice came from behind her. She turned. He looked better than he had in weeks, cleaner, healthier, though there was still a wariness in his eyes that would probably never completely disappear. Some scars went too deep. "Your offer," Clara said, "about the land up in the high country. Still stands, always will." She looked at him, this man who'd been a complete stranger 2 months ago, who'd become something else entirely through fire and blood and choices that neither of them could take back even if they wanted to. "I don't want charity," Clara said carefully. "I know, never thought you did. And I don't want to be anyone's project or responsibility. Know that too." She took a breath. "But I also don't want to be alone anymore. I'm tired of being alone, of being invisible, of pretending I don't need anyone." Rowan's face softened. "So am I." Clara held out her hand. "Partners then. Equal partners. 50-50 on everything. We build something together, something that belongs to both of us." Rowan took her hand, shook it firmly. Partners. They left Iron Hollow 6 days later. Not running. Not fleeing in fear or desperation. Just moving on, the way people do when one chapter ends and another begins. When staying means living in the past and leaving means building towards something new. Samuel Cord came with them, along with Josiah Reeve and his family, and 3 other households who were ready for a fresh start away from Iron Hollow's ghosts. Together, they headed into the high country, toward the land Rowan had fought so hard to keep, carrying tools and supplies and hope, and the hard-won knowledge that surviving wasn't the same as living. The first winter was absolutely brutal. They managed to build 2 rough cabins before the snow came, but barely. Food was scarce. The cold cut through everything, no matter how many layers they wore or how carefully they tended the fires. There were nights Clara genuinely thought they wouldn't make it, that they'd all freeze or starve or just give up and walk away. But they didn't give up. They survived. And when spring finally came, green and alive and somehow more beautiful than anything Clara had ever seen, they started building something bigger than mere survival. A year later, Clara stood on the porch of a real house. Not a cabin thrown together in desperate haste, but an actual house with glass windows and a proper stone fireplace and enough rooms for the growing community they were building. Below, in the valley, fields had been cleared and planted. Crops were growing. A small trading post was under construction, and there was talk of building a schoolhouse before the next winter. It wasn't Iron Hollow. It wasn't anywhere Clara had ever imagined ending up. It was better. Rowan came out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag, sawdust caught in his hair. Foundation solid on the new barn. Should last generations if we maintain it properly. Clara smiled. "Good. We're going to need it." He stood beside her, looking out at what they'd built together. "You ever regret it? Stepping forward that day? Stopping the hanging?" Clara thought about it, really thought. About the noose and the contract and the fire. About the desperate flight to the capital and the violence at Greer's ranch. About everything she'd lost. Her store, her savings, the quiet, predictable life she'd known. And about everything she'd found. Strength she hadn't known she possessed. A voice that mattered. A community built on something better than fear. "No," she said finally. "Not even once. Not for a second." Because the truth was, saving Rowan hadn't really been about him at all. It had been about her, about refusing to be invisible, about choosing to stand up when the world expected her to disappear, about learning that her voice and her choices mattered, even when, especially when, the powerful said otherwise. People needed that reminder sometimes. Needed to see that they could fight back, that their voices carried weight. That even when the corrupt and powerful seemed completely untouchable, they weren't. Not really. Iron Hollow had taught her that lesson in the hardest way possible. And even though the town itself remained fractured, some people rebuilding, others leaving, the scars still visible in empty lots and burned foundations, the lesson had spread. Word had gotten out about what happened, about a woman who'd stood up to corrupt authority, about a community that had fought back and won, even at terrible cost. Other towns started asking questions about their own judges and officials. People started demanding accountability. Change was slow, messy, imperfect, but it was happening. Samuel Cord walked up the path, leaning on a beautifully carved walking stick Rowan had made him over the winter. "Riders coming," he said, pointing toward the trail that led down from the ridge. Clara shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun. 3 horses, moving at an easy pace. As they got closer, she recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Calhoun. He dismounted stiffly. The ride from Iron Hollow was long and hard, but there was something like peace in his weathered face, something that hadn't been there before. "Sheriff," Clara said, "wasn't expecting to see you out here." Calhoun pulled a thick envelope from his coat. "Got a letter from the territorial governor. She wanted me to deliver it personally. Seemed important." Clara opened it, read quickly, her eyes widening with each paragraph. "What is it?" Rowan asked, reading her expression. "They want to incorporate us officially, make this a recognized settlement with territorial support. They're offering funding for infrastructure, legal recognition, protection." Clara looked up from the letter, stunned. "They want to make us legitimate." Rowan frowned. "Why would they do that?" Calhoun smiled, rare and genuine. "Because word got out about what you did. How you stood up to Halbrook. How you built this place from absolutely nothing. People are calling it New Haven. A second chance for folks who got squeezed out of places like Iron Hollow. The governor sees it as a model, proof that communities can rebuild better than they were before." Clara looked at Rowan. He looked back at her. Neither of them had set out to start a movement or build something meaningful. They'd just been trying to survive. To do the right thing when the easier path was to look away. But survival, it turned out, was contagious, and so was hope. "Tell the governor we accept," Clara said, with gratitude. Calhoun tipped his hat. "I'll pass it along. And Miss Vance..." He paused, something heavy in his expression. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't do more back in Iron Hollow. I should have stood with you from the very start instead of waiting until I had no other choice." Clara's throat tightened. "You helped when it mattered most. You gave us a chance when we had nothing. That's enough." He nodded, climbed back onto his horse, and rode off toward Iron Hollow. That night, Clara and Rowan sat on the porch together, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The community was settling in for the evening, smoke rising from chimneys, voices carrying on the wind, children laughing, the comfortable sounds of life taking root in good soil. "You think we'll make it long term?" Clara asked. "Really make it?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think we already have. Everything else is just building on the foundation, making it stronger, better." Clara leaned back against the porch railing, closed her eyes, felt the weight of the past year finally begin to lift from her shoulders. She'd spent so much of her life afraid. Afraid of being noticed, afraid of failing, afraid of standing out and being crushed for daring to be visible. Now, sitting here with a thriving community that existed because she'd refused to stay silent, she understood something fundamental. Fear was just another cage, another way of controlling people, and she was done living in cages. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, the months into years. New Haven grew steadily. More families arrived, drawn by the promise of fair treatment and land they could actually own without fear of it being stolen. Word spread about the settlement where power didn't belong to the richest or the loudest, but to everyone willing to work for the common good. Clara ran the trading post and discovered she had a real talent for it, not just selling goods, but listening to people, understanding what they needed, building connections between the settlement and the wider world. Rowan worked the land, taught newcomers how to survive in the high country's harsh conditions, and slowly, carefully, let people see past his hard exterior to the decent man underneath. They weren't perfect. They fought sometimes, disagreed often, struggled under the weight of leadership neither had asked for or particularly wanted. The settlement faced challenges, hard winters, supply problems, conflicts between strong personalities, the constant pressure of making a new community work. But they showed up, every single day, did the work, made the hard choices, listened to people, tried to be fair. And that, Clara learned, was what actually mattered, not being perfect, not having all the answers, not never making mistakes, just refusing to give up, just trying to do better today than yesterday, just remembering that power corrupts unless it's constantly questioned and held accountable. On the 2-year anniversary of the day Clara had stopped a hanging in Iron Hollow, the community gathered for a celebration. It wasn't anything fancy, just a shared meal around a bonfire, everyone contributing what they could, the kind of simple gathering that made people feel like they belonged to something worth protecting. Samuel Cord stood, raised his battered tin cup, and said in his gravelly voice, "To New Haven," and to the woman who reminded all of us that standing up beats staying silent, every single time. Everyone raised their cups, cheered, celebrated not just survival, but the life they'd built from ashes and determination and stubborn refusal to accept that the powerful always win. Clara caught Rowan's eye across the dancing flames. He raised his cup to her, that small half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, the one that meant he was actually happy, even if he'd never say it out loud. She raised hers back. Later, after the fire had burned down to glowing embers and most people had drifted back to their homes, Clara walked to the edge of the settlement, stood looking out at the dark canyon beyond, the stars overhead impossibly bright in the clear mountain air. She thought about this woman she'd been 2 years ago, invisible, afraid, convinced her life would always be small and quiet and fundamentally unimportant. That woman was gone. Not because Clara had become someone completely different, but because she'd finally become the person she was always supposed to be. The version that had been buried under years of fear and silence and society's expectations, just waiting for the moment when staying quiet hurt more than speaking up. Rowan joined her, stood in comfortable silence before speaking. "What are you thinking about?" Clara smiled into the darkness. "That I'm glad I didn't stay quiet. That stepping into that street was the scariest and best thing I ever did." "Me too." They stood together, watching the night, and Clara felt something she'd rarely experienced in her entire life. Peace. Not the quiet kind that came from hiding or avoiding conflict, but the hard-won kind that came from fighting for what mattered and surviving the battle, from building something good on top of something broken, from learning that you were stronger than you ever imagined possible. The world would keep turning. There would be new challenges, new injustices, new reasons to be afraid. Power would always seek to consolidate itself. The corrupt would always look for new ways to exploit the vulnerable. But Clara knew now, really knew, down in her bones, that she didn't have to face any of it alone. That standing with others, imperfect and messy and complicated as people were, was infinitely stronger than any fortress built from silence and fear. Iron Hollow had tried to teach her that people like her didn't matter, that power always won, that the safest thing was to disappear. Instead, she'd learned something completely different. That one person, standing at exactly the right moment, could stop a hanging, could expose corruption, could change the trajectory of an entire community, could build something better from the ruins of something broken, not because they were special or perfect or chosen by fate, just because they chose to stand when everyone else was sitting down, chose to speak when everyone else was silent, chose to fight when everyone else had already surrendered. And that choice, that simple, terrifying, absolutely crucial choice, was the most powerful thing any human being could make. To be seen, to be heard, to matter, to refuse to disappear. The rest, Clara thought as she looked out at New Haven, at the lights in windows, the smoke from chimneys, the life blooming where there had been nothing. The rest was just details. The important part was the choice, and she'd made hers.